Welcome to the Truth in Crime Case Files. Christy Simmons was the nurse who seemed to have been born with a natural gift for caring. At 34, she had already built a reputation as one of the most dedicated and compassionate nurses at St. Mary's Hospital in Fairview, a small town. Outside of work, Christy's life was relatively quiet. She enjoyed reading and spending time with her best friend, Heather Scott, who was also a nurse at St. Mary's. Heather was one of the few people who truly understood Christy, sharing both her passion for nursing and her sense of humor. The two had been inseparable since meeting in nursing school, often spending their days off together, exploring the small town or relaxing at Christy's apartment. It was during one of these relaxed afternoons that Heather first noticed a change in Christy. Christy seemed more distracted than usual, her eyes darting to her phone every few minutes. When Heather asked if something was wrong, Christy had brushed it off with a smile, saying she was just tired from work. But the truth was far more complicated. Christy had been seeing someone she shouldn't have been seeing. Raul Washer was a 38-year-old businessman who ran a successful real estate company in Fairview. He was well known around town, both for his business acumen and his charming demeanor. Raul was married to Elaine Washer, a devoted homemaker who had been by his side for over a decade. Their marriage, however, was far from perfect. Behind closed doors, Raul and Elaine's relationship was strained, marked by frequent arguments and Raul's growing list of affairs. Raul met Christy during one of his visits to St. Mary's Hospital. His father had been admitted for a minor surgery, and Christy had been his nurse. What started as polite conversation quickly turned into something more. Raul was captivated by Christy's kindness and beauty, and Christy, despite knowing he was married, found herself drawn to his charisma and attention. Over time, their interactions grew more frequent, and before long, they were entangled in a secret affair. Christy knew it was wrong. She knew that getting involved with a married man went against everything she believed in. But there was something about Raul that she couldn't resist. He made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. For a time, their affair was exhilarating, a whirlwind of stolen moments and whispered confessions. They met in secret, away from prying eyes, sometimes in Christy's apartment, other times in Raul's car parked on a secluded street. But as the weeks turned into months, the weight of their secret began to take its toll on Christy. She found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, terrified that someone would find out. She became more withdrawn, her normally cheerful demeanor replaced with an air of anxiety. Her performance at work began to suffer, and even Heather noticed the change. Heather tried to reach out, sensing something was troubling her friend, but Christy remained tight-lipped, refusing to share the burden of her secret. She knew that if the affair came to light, it would ruin her reputation, her career, and possibly her life. She was trapped in a cycle of guilt and desire, unable to break free from the grip Raul had on her. Unbeknownst to Christy, the situation was far more precarious than she realized. Elaine Washer was not oblivious to her husband's infidelities. She had endured them for years, turning a blind eye to the whispers and rumors that followed Raul. But this time was different. Elaine sensed a change in Raul, a certain distance, a lack of interest in their life together. She began to suspect he was involved with someone new, and her suspicions were confirmed when she found a series of intimate text messages between Raul and an unknown number. Consumed by rage and betrayal, Elaine vowed to find out who the other woman was, and what she discovered would soon set the stage for a tragedy that would shock the entire town. As Christy navigated the complexities of her secret affair, she was unaware of the storm brewing just outside her peaceful facade. Her world was about to come crashing down, and nothing would ever be the same again. It was a cold, bleak morning when the tranquility of Fairview was shattered by a blood-curdling scream. Heather Scott, Christy Simmons's closest friend, had been growing increasingly worried over the past few days. Christy had missed several shifts at St. Mary's Hospital without any explanation, which was entirely unlike her. Calls and texts went unanswered, and when Heather had knocked on Christy's door the previous day, there had been no response. Panic set in as Heather sensed something was terribly wrong. Today, she decided to check on her friend one more time. As she approached Christy's apartment, a sinking feeling of dread washed over her. Heather knocked, her knuckles rapping sharply against the wood. "Christy," she called out, her voice trembling. But once again, there was no answer. She tried the door and found it unlocked. With her heart pounding, she pushed it open and stepped inside. As Heather cautiously moved further into the apartment, her eyes fell on the kitchen. There, on the linoleum floor, lay Christy. Her body was sprawled out, lifeless, in a pool of dark, congealed blood. Multiple stab wounds were visible across her torso, her once bright eyes now blank and staring into nothingness. Heather's scream pierced the silence, echoing down the hallway. She stumbled back, nearly slipping on the blood-slicked floor, and bolted out of the apartment. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion, quickly gathered. Within minutes, the police arrived, led by Detective Harrison Blake, a seasoned investigator known for his tenacity and attention to detail. Detective Blake's team immediately secured the scene, cordoning off the area with yellow tape. The detective himself was a tall man with a stern face and a reputation for being thorough. He took a moment to assess the scene, his sharp eyes scanning the chaos. It was clear to him that this was no ordinary crime. The brutality of the attack suggested a crime of passion, driven by intense emotion. Christy had not just been killed, she had been slaughtered. As forensic experts moved in to collect evidence, Heather, still in shock, was taken aside for questioning. Her face was pale, her hands trembling uncontrollably. "I just wanted to check on her," she stammered. "She hadn't been to work. I was worried. I never thought." Her voice trailed off into a sob, tears streaming down her face. Detective Blake knew Heather needed time to process what she had seen, but time was not a luxury they could afford. Every second counted in the early hours of a murder investigation. Inside the apartment, the forensic team worked meticulously, collecting every piece of evidence they could find. Blood samples, fingerprints, and a bloody knife discarded near Christy's body were all carefully documented and bagged. There were clear signs of a violent struggle, broken glass, a lamp knocked over, and a bloody handprint smeared across the wall. It was as if Christy had fought for her life, desperate to fend off her attacker. As the investigators combed through the crime scene, they found one crucial piece of evidence, a torn piece of fabric clutched tightly in Christy's hand. Detective Blake examined it closely. It appeared to be from a dark-colored garment, possibly a coat or a sweater. He knew this could be vital. It meant that Christy had fought back, tearing at her assailant's clothing in a final act of defiance. Whoever had done this might have left the scene with a visible tear or missing piece of fabric. News of Christy's murder spread quickly through Fairview. The once quiet town was now buzzing with fear and speculation. How could something so horrific happen here? Christy was beloved by many, who would want to harm her? As Detective Blake continued his investigation, one thing became increasingly clear: this was not a random act of violence. The savagery of the attack suggested a deeply personal motive. The detective knew he needed to start unraveling Christy's life, looking closely at anyone who might have had a reason to harm her. As he reviewed the initial statements and evidence, a name kept coming up: Raul Washer. The whispers of an affair, a strained marriage, and a jealous wife pointed to a tangled web of secrets and lies. But it was still too early to draw conclusions. For now, Detective Blake focused on the evidence at hand, knowing that somewhere in the chaos of Christy's final moments lay the key to unlocking the truth. The search for Christy Simmons's killer had just begun, and Detective Blake was determined to uncover every dark secret lurking beneath Fairview's surface. The investigation into Christy Simmons's murder was now in full swing. Detective Harrison Blake, a seasoned investigator known for his relentless pursuit of justice, was determined to piece together the final hours of Christy's life. With the crime scene thoroughly combed for evidence, his team began the painstaking task of reconstructing the events leading up to her death. Detective Blake started by interviewing Christy's closest friends and colleagues at St. Mary's Hospital. Heather Scott, still shaken from her discovery of the body, described Christy as a loving friend and a dedicated nurse. She recalled Christy's recent behavior, her distracted nature, the secretive phone calls, and her reluctance to share what was troubling her. These signs pointed to something, or someone, Christy had been hiding. As more co-workers were interviewed, a clearer picture began to emerge. Whispers of a secret affair between Christy and Raul Washer, a well-known businessman in town, were common knowledge among the hospital staff. Christy had been seen with Raul multiple times, and the nature of their interactions had sparked rumors. Despite Raul's seemingly charming demeanor, many of Christy's colleagues had noticed the toll the affair was taking on her. Her performance at work had suffered, and she appeared increasingly anxious and withdrawn. Armed with this new information, Detective Blake turned his attention to Raul Washer. Raul was brought in for questioning, his demeanor calm but guarded. He confirmed he had known Christy and admitted to the affair but was quick to assert his innocence. "I was at my office the whole night," he insisted, "I had nothing to do with this." He provided an alibi, claiming he had been working late, alone, reviewing contracts for his real estate business. However, his alibi was thin, with no one to corroborate his story. Detective Blake could sense that Raul was hiding something, but without concrete evidence, he couldn't press further. He needed more than just suspicions and rumors to make an arrest. Next, Blake focused on Elaine Washer, Raul's wife. Elaine was known around town as a quiet, unassuming woman who kept to herself. But behind closed doors, it was a different story. Friends and acquaintances described Elaine as a woman deeply hurt by her husband's infidelity, a woman who had endured years of betrayal and humiliation. When questioned, Elaine appeared composed but visibly shaken. She acknowledged that she had known about the affair and admitted that she was angry and hurt. However, she claimed she had been at home all evening, alone, with no one to confirm her whereabouts. Despite her calm exterior, Detective Blake sensed a simmering anger beneath the surface. He noticed a scratch on her arm, a fresh, deep cut that she dismissed as an accident from doing housework. But coupled with her shaky alibi and the evidence from the crime scene, it was enough to raise his suspicions. Detective Blake ordered a closer look at Elaine's car. His instincts paid off when surveillance footage from a nearby convenience store showed Elaine's car driving past Christy's apartment on the night of the murder. It wasn't enough to prove guilt, but it certainly placed her at the scene. Further deepening the mystery, a forensic analysis of the torn fabric clutched in Christy's hand revealed it matched a coat owned by Elaine. When confronted with this evidence, Elaine's calm demeanor began to crack. She denied any involvement, but her story started to unravel under pressure. As Detective Blake reviewed the mounting evidence, he realized they were on the brink of a breakthrough. The fingerprints on the knife, the torn fabric, the surveillance footage, everything pointed toward Elaine. But Blake needed a confession or undeniable proof to secure an arrest warrant. With tensions high and the whole town watching, Blake knew time was running out. Every lead brought them closer to the truth, but also raised more questions. Was Elaine truly capable of such a violent act? Or was there another piece of the puzzle yet to be uncovered? One thing was certain, the more Detective Blake uncovered, the darker and more twisted the story became. He could feel the truth was within reach, and he was determined to bring justice for Christy, no matter where the evidence led. With the investigation intensifying, Detective Harrison Blake knew it was crucial to narrow down the list of suspects. The evidence increasingly pointed towards two individuals, Raul Washer, the unfaithful husband, and Elaine Washer, his betrayed wife. Both had motives and questionable alibis, and both were deeply entwined in Christy Simmons's life and death. Raul Washer was the first to be scrutinized further. He was the classic philanderer, charming on the outside but hiding a darker side. His affair with Christy had been passionate but secretive, suggesting that he wanted to keep his options open while maintaining his marriage for appearances and financial stability. Raul's business dealings were also under strain, and the affair could have posed a threat to his reputation. Did he feel cornered, desperate enough to silence Christy permanently? His flimsy alibi placed him at his office alone, which could not be confirmed by any witness or security footage. The more Blake dug, the more Raul's life seemed to unravel, exposing a man with everything to lose. Elaine Washer, on the other hand, was a woman scorned. She had endured years of infidelity, each affair leaving a deeper scar on her psyche. Friends described Elaine as having grown increasingly unstable in recent months, prone to sudden outbursts and erratic behavior. She had the motive of a betrayed wife seeking vengeance. When questioned, her calm facade slipped, revealing flashes of anger and resentment. The fresh scratch on her arm and the surveillance footage placing her near the crime scene painted a damning picture. And the torn fabric in Christy's hand, matching Elaine's coat, was hard evidence that she had been in a physical confrontation with Christy. However, there was another angle that Detective Blake couldn't ignore, the possibility of a third party. What if someone else, unknown to them, had found out about the affair and decided to take matters into their own hands? A jealous ex-lover, a spurned friend, or even someone from Christy's past, Blake knew they couldn't rule out any possibilities without more concrete evidence. The detective reviewed every detail, looking for something they might have missed. As the investigation continued, a troubling thought gnawed at him: could both Raul and Elaine have been involved? Perhaps this wasn't a crime committed by one person but a conspiracy between two people whose lives had been torn apart by betrayal and lies. Could they have plotted together to eliminate Christy, each for their own reasons? The pressure was mounting to solve the case, and the residents of Fairview were growing increasingly anxious. With every new piece of evidence, the lines between victim and perpetrator blurred. Detective Blake knew he was close to the truth, but he also understood that the truth could be far more complicated than anyone had imagined. As he prepared for the next round of interrogations, Blake realized that he would need to push harder. Someone was hiding something, and he was determined to uncover every dark secret before another life was lost in the wake of Christy Simmons's tragic murder. The investigation was at a tense crossroads, with Detective Harrison Blake feeling the weight of each passing day. He needed a breakthrough, a definitive piece of evidence or a confession that would unravel the truth about Christy Simmons's murder. The pressure from the community and his superiors was mounting, and he could sense that the killer was getting nervous. Blake's gut told him that Elaine Washer held the key to solving this case. The torn fabric matching her coat, the scratch on her arm, and the surveillance footage near Christy's apartment were all damning. But Elaine's denial had been consistent, even as her alibi crumbled. Blake decided it was time to confront Elaine once more, this time with a new strategy. He invited Elaine back to the station for another round of questioning, this time under the guise of clarifying some inconsistencies in her story. As she sat across from him in the cold, sterile interrogation room, Elaine appeared more anxious than before. Her eyes darted around the room, and her hands trembled slightly. Blake noticed her unease and decided to press her further. "We know you were near Christy's apartment that night, Elaine," Blake said calmly, sliding the surveillance photos across the table. "Your car was spotted just a few blocks away. You need to start being honest with us. Why were you there?" Elaine's eyes flickered with fear and anger. She hesitated, her mouth opening and closing as if grappling with an internal battle. Finally, with a sigh, she broke down. "I went there to confront her," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to make her stop seeing Raul. I didn't mean for things to get out of hand." Detective Blake leaned in, sensing he was on the verge of a breakthrough. "What happened when you got there, Elaine?" Tears welled up in Elaine's eyes as she continued. I confronted her, and we argued. She wouldn't listen, she was so stubborn. I grabbed her arm, and she tried to fight back. I didn't want to hurt her, but she kept pushing me, and I lost control." Her voice broke as the weight of her confession settled over her. Blake pressed gently, "Did Raul know you were going there? Did he ask you to confront her?" Elaine shook her head vehemently. No, he didn't know. I didn't tell him. I thought I could handle it on my own, but I never meant to kill her. It was an accident. Blake knew this was the moment he had been waiting for. Elaine's confession, though partial, provided the motive and the admission of guilt he needed. She had gone to Christy's apartment fueled by jealousy and rage, and in a fit of uncontrolled emotion, she had murdered her. Blake signaled to his team to document the confession. With Elaine's words on record, he had the evidence to charge her. The case that had gripped the town of Fairview was finally coming to a close, and while Christy Simmons's tragic death could never be undone, justice was finally within reach. The trial began a few weeks later, drawing a packed courtroom. The prosecution painted a picture of a woman driven by jealousy and betrayal, detailing how Elaine, pushed to her breaking point by her husband's infidelity, confronted Christy in a moment of rage. They presented the forensic evidence, the torn fabric matching Elaine's coat, the surveillance footage placing her near Christy's apartment, and, most damning of all, Elaine's own confession. The defense, however, argued that Elaine's actions were not premeditated. They portrayed her as a woman who acted in a moment of emotional turmoil, a victim of her husband's unfaithfulness, who never intended to kill Christy. They pleaded for leniency, suggesting that Elaine's actions were a tragic mistake rather than cold-blooded murder. After deliberation, the jury reached a verdict, guilty of manslaughter. Elaine was sentenced to 15 years in prison. As the gavel struck, a sense of closure descended on the courtroom, but it was bittersweet. Christy Simmons's life had been cut short by a tragic twist of fate, leaving a lasting scar on all those involved. As Elaine was led away, the reality of her actions settled over her, and the people of Fairview were left to grapple with the aftermath of a love triangle that ended in bloodshed. The verdict of Elaine Washer's trial brought a sense of finality to Fairview, but the scars of Christy Simmons's murder ran deep. Christy's family, devastated by her loss, struggled to come to terms with the senseless violence that took her away from them. They mourned the future she would never have, a life full of promise cut short. Raul Washer, now a widower and marked by scandal, faced the fallout of his infidelity. His business suffered, and he became a pariah in his own community, forever tied to the tragic events that his affair had set into motion. He would spend the rest of his days haunted by guilt and regret, a constant reminder of the consequences of his actions. In prison, Elaine faced a long, lonely road of reflection and remorse. The weight of her crime bore heavily on her, a daily reminder of the life she destroyed in a moment of rage. A Truth in Crime Case Solvers. Interested in more real-life murder mysteries? Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Do you have any thoughts about this case or have a case of your own you'd like us to investigate? Leave us a comment. Until then, stay safe.